Where Screams Come True. A novel written and read to you by Dave Cap. Prologue. The grinding of gears sent shivers up Gordon Benson's spine and rattled through his cavities as the mechanical boat came screeching to a halt. He had been working on the same area of the dark ride for nearly 3 hours. For whatever reason, the boat, which was designed to look like a rickety old rowboat, would reach a standstill at the same spot every single time he started it up. "Dag-nab thing," he groaned in frustration. It wasn't just the fact that the boat refused to pass through to the pirate ship scene after the mini drop that bothered him, but he also had to hear the exact same words from the animatronic robot over and over and over again. "Yo-ho-ho, landlubbers!" The animatronic pirate would boom as soon as the boat arrived into the open room. It stood atop an artificial island, nearly identical to the one that Gordon had spread his entire toolbox over just behind it. "I be Cap'n Jolly Nick Allstott," the robot continued, "and ye 'bout to join my crew. Come aboard, 'tis about time we take over this town." It pointed a rapier toward the 2 humongous pirate ships ahead. Gordon had to admit that the robot was quite impressive and appreciated how realistic it looked the first dozen times he watched its performance. Now it was stale, like a rerun of a television show that he had seen too many times. He wished he could have changed the channel. Mopping the sweat from his bald head with the collar of his once white t-shirt, he let out a deep sigh and picked up the controller for the ride. As he pulled the lever back and pushed the green button, the boat backed out of the room. That was when the goosebumps spread up from his lower back to cover both of his arms. No matter how many times he watched, he still shuddered as Jolly Nick Allstott's motions reversed as he reverted back to his starting position. The audio track may have cut off, but Jolly Nick wasn't the slightest bit silent. Metallic scrapes made Gordon's flesh crawl as the robot gnashed and whined itself back into place. What little visibility was given by the house lights cast a huge shadow of the robot onto the rugged stone wall behind him, mirroring the pirate's every move. The shadow looked nothing like a robot, but of a man who was trying desperately to stop a spider from creeping up his breeches. "The heck is the matter?" Gordon asked himself as he stroked the coarse whiskers along his jawline. After switching the power off, he jumped from his sandy platform and sloshed through the knee-high water to once again see if something was loose on the track. Everything was connected perfectly, which he was quite proud of days ago when he and his crew finished building the ride. The call from Matthew Lovelle came in just as he entered Georgia. He was going to meet his workers on their next project, a roller coaster that was supposed to have a drop as high as Mount Everest. "But we already started the new project," Frank Haynes, the mechanic of Gordon's business, whined. Gordon did all that he could to stifle a laugh. It was amazing how Frank, a man of 50, sounded exactly like his teenage son when he complained. "We got a deadline, and they're paying us way more. Not for nothing, but judging by the condition of that old park, it don't seem like there are going to be many butts in the seat of that ride anyway." "Just because the ride is broken down doesn't make it any less important. We were hired for a job, and we aren't gonna abandon it at less than 100%. Because if you want your thrill ride to work day and night, call us because we'll do it right." Gordon could hear Frank roll his eyes. He remembered chewing his words. "Tell you what, you guys keep working on the coaster, and I'll go back myself." "You sure? I could send Rick, or—" "Don't worry about it. You keep the boys rolling, and I'll be there as soon as possible." Gordon wished he hadn't said that. If his team were here, they could figure out what was wrong with the ride, as they always did. While he may have owned Thrill-Rite, a company that traveled all over to build theme park rides. He was nothing without his team. Finally, he admitted defeat and reached into his pocket for his cell phone. If the team could spare even one guy, Gordon knew that the ride would be fixed in time to hit a diner on the road back to the roller coaster job. A moment after pushing call, the exit door, hidden in darkness, banged open, letting in a stream of pale white. It had been an eternity since Gordon had seen any sort of natural light, and it stung his eyes like he had been chopping up onions for the past 3 hours. He ended the call, stuffed his phone back into his pocket, and waved to the man who crossed the threshold. "There he is!" Matthew Lavelle's voice was blooming with excitement. He carried a large chest inside, and the doors slammed behind him. "Oof, this is a heavy one!" Dropping the chest next to Gordon's toolbox, he filled his lungs with air. "Don't mix these two up now," he chuckled. "What is that?" Gordon asked. "Found this stuff in a little shop downtown. It'll be great for the ride, don't you think?" Gordon climbed up to Jolly Nick's island and noticed that the owner of the park was wearing a ridiculous pirate captain's hat, its edges frayed as if it had been lit on fire. "Looks good, Captain," he lied. "What's in the chest?" "Maybe some buried treasure." Matthew scanned Gordon's scattered tools and picked up a monkey wrench. "Can I use this?" "Don't see why not. Just be..." Before Gordon could finish, Matthew smashed the chest's lock. "Split everything 50-50? He smirked. A cloud of yellow dust billowed from the inside, and the coughs that he let out bounced off the walls. "Not treasure, but could still help make me rich." He began to pull out a series of yellow sticks and examined each one before setting it down. Gordon took a step closer and realized that Matthew wasn't pulling sticks from the old chest. No, they were dusty, age-stained, cracked bones. "That is absolutely disgusting." He felt his throat tighten as he stifled a dry heave. "Oh, come on now. They're obviously not real. I'm going to put them near the Jolly Nick bot. He'll look even more savage." Matthew began to toss the bones from one island to the other, as if he were gathering kindling to create a fire pit. The sound of the bones clanking onto the plastic island made the hairs on the back of Gordon's neck stand on end. While he was no expert on the subject, he still had a creeping suspicion that the bones weren't fake. Not only did they sound real and look real, but whoever heard of someone locking away a fake skeleton in a chest? The strong urge to voice his concern to his client grew over him. But who was he to tell a grown man what he should or shouldn't put in his ride? A vibrating notification made Gordon reach into his pocket once again and break free from his horror movie visions. The text message that he received from Frank read, "Saw a missed call. You on your way here?" Gordon pondered how to respond, then decided it could wait. "Yo ho ho!" Gordon looked up from his phone to see two cavernous eye sockets. The maggot-colored skull that hovered before him had a smile that was missing a handful of teeth, and those that hadn't fallen out were worn down to nubs from decay. The mouth began to move up and down, its jaw clicking like an old door hinge. Deep dents decorated the top of the skull head, and Gordon couldn't help but think that the man was probably beaten to death. "Pretty neat, huh?" Matthew asked, continuing to open and close the skull's jaw. He plopped the pirate's hat on top of its cracked cranium and held it up to the air. "To be or not to be? That is the question." Gordon grumbled and began to wonder if the career he chose was just filled with men who didn't want to grow up. Matthew must have noticed this as he placed the skull down next to the rest of the bones. "Still having trouble?" He cleared his throat and wiped his hands on his khaki shorts. "You can say that again," Gordon answered. "I'll leave you to it then, Mr. Benson." Gordon anxiously scratched behind his ear. "Thank you, Mr. Lovelle. You have my word that I'll have her up and running by lunchtime." Matthew glanced at his watch. It's 4:30. Gordon didn't respond. "Let me know if you need anything," Mr. Lovelle said as he inched toward the exit. When the door slammed, the anger that had been boiling inside of Gordon was released in a scream that would have made a tea kettle sound like a mouse. Kicking the skull, he felt his toes shatter, and he let out a werewolf howl of pain. Was he really that bad at his job that he had spent the entire morning and afternoon trying to fix one tiny snag? After switching everything back on, he gingerly stepped up to the island where an idle Jolly Nick stood. His big toe was definitely broken, the same one he broke multiple times during his high school football years. All he wanted to do was get this job over with, tape his toe up, and get on the road. The room was soundless, except for a few stray droplets of water that fell from the rafters above. But in a moment, the mechanical boat would splash into view and bring everything to life. He pictured boys and girls staring in awe with wide eyes at what he had created and couldn't stop the grin that spread across his face. A sharp burst of pain shot up from Gordon's foot, causing him to see stars and his smile unweaved. He closed his eyes, trying to push the pain away and instead focus on the task at hand. He inhaled deeply through his nose, but before he could let the air out of his mouth, a stomach-churning smell crept through his nostrils. It smelled sour. It smelled rotten. It smelled dead. Suddenly, a swarm of smoke erupted from the island that Gordon stood upon. Thick plumes of black rose high above to smash into the ceiling, blinding him. Like a tornado, it twisted around, and a shrill scream bellowed from within. A skinny tint of red swirled around the smoke, wrapping the cloud of darkness. "It must be the bot!" he cried to no one between dry coughs. Covering his mouth with his shirt, he hobbled toward the animatronic, only to see that the smoke was coming from behind it. It consumed the skull and the rest of the bones, and Gordon knew that he was next. Before he could take off, though, the twister shrunk down until there was nothing left but fluttering blood-red sparks and a pile of black ash. Deep, long breaths wheezed, turning both of his legs to pudding. The gurgled gasps for air broke the silence, and Gordon cried out in horror as a fully formed skeleton began to rise up from the ash. It limped forward and stared at the robots. Whether it didn't notice Gordon or simply didn't care about him, he couldn't say. One by one, it peeled Jolly Nick's fingers from the hilt of his rapier and claimed it as its own. Gordon took a step back to try and escape, but his injured toe caused him to trip, sending a few pebbles to plop into the pool below. With its body still facing Jolly Nick, the skeleton turned its head all the way around to see what was going on behind its back. The dead creature's body creaked and snapped as it rotated to face forward. It flexed its fingers and pointed the rapier into the air. Yo, ho, ho. The skeleton rasped as it narrowed its piercingly black eyes upon its prey. Please, don't hurt me, Gordon begged. Taking another step backwards, he tried to ignore the throbbing pain in his big toe. He looked at the captain's hat that Matthew Lovelle had placed upon the dead creature's head and noticed the faded skull and crossbones in its center. It seemed to be cackling at his pain. It was ready for a show. It was ready to watch him die. With a fury that could only be brought from a man who was locked in a treasure chest, the skeleton charged forward to push Gordon off the island. Its hands were bitter cold, so cold that they burned like white-hot fire. And when they clamped tight around Gordon's neck, he saw the mechanical boat out of the corner of his eye. The last thing he heard was Jolly Nick Allstott's robotic voice. Yo ho ho, landlubbers! Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you heard, pick up Where Screams Come True on Amazon. And if you do decide to read it, be sure to review it. Anyway, as always, be nice to each other.